Hello and welcome to the Reuse Company webinars. You will be muted during the webinar, but if you have any questions or comments, you can use the questions section. We will answer them all at the end of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and we will send you the link to the recording in a few days. The topic for today is managing data for acquisition. My name is Cecilia Karlsson and I will be hosting today's webinar. With me, I have Lars Anderberg, application consultant at the Reuse Company, who is today's presenter. This is the agenda for the webinar. First, we'll have a short presentation of the company and the presenter. Then Lars will explain why acquisition. Next, we'll see how to plan the acquisition and how to do an evaluation. After that, we will see the final steps before the contract and the follow-up after the contract. Finally, we will have a demonstration and some time for questions. So first, a few words about us. The Reuse Company is a tool vendor specialized in the application of reuse methods, semantic technologies, and artificial intelligence to improve the digitalization of the systems engineering lifecycle. We promote lifecycle management methodologies guided by reuse, based on a knowledge-centric approach, supporting the notion of an authoritative source of truth, offering connectivity to everything, unlimited interoperability, and providing full support to technical management as in ISO 15288. We are usually known in the market for our software tools RQA, Quality Studio, and RAT, authoring tool for quality management of requirements, documents, and models. Then we have our Traceability Studio, V&V Studio, and KM Knowledge Manager. And now we are launching our newest product, SES Engineering Studio, an interoperability hub that enables digital support to all the technical management processes for the engineering items in your tools ecosystem. Let me introduce you to the presenter. Lars is an application consultant at the Reuse Company, and he has been working with requirements engineering and acquisition support for over 20 years. Lars also has the INCOSE ESEP certification. So let's start then with today's topic. Hello, Lars.
Hello, Cecilia. Thank you for the introduction, and welcome everybody, and good morning or good afternoon to you all, depending on where you're located. Okay, a few words about acquisition then. When you develop a system according to any standard, for example 15288, which is also often described using this V model, there is mentioned in the standards there is always an option to acquire components or parts of the system, or even entire systems that you do not develop in-house. The development should be sort of the same, but there are a few things that we need to take special care when we are actually acquiring parts of the system. As in any case where you develop things, there is an iterative approach to it, meaning that you don't do one thing finished and continue with next, because you may move yourself up and down along any of these axes in this model. There is also a recursive option to this, meaning that to some extent what is for you perhaps a component may be for somebody else their entire product. So this smaller V's here may represent what we would refer to as some sort of simple acquisition, in lack of a better word, meaning, for example, somebody has developed a component or a subsystem, small parts that you will be using within your own system. However, in more complex case, the acquisition is sort of interlinked with all the other activities that you are performing during your development stage. This produces, of course, a lot of data, and central to this is the requirements. However, there is not only requirements that need to be managed, and specifically in an acquisition context, A lot more data is necessary and will appear as the processes progresses here, as I will show you. So managing of requirement is basically just part of the truth, because you will be managing a lot more. So I try to refer to that as requirement management plus to indicate that there are more to this actually. Okay, so why do we actually do this? Well, as I mentioned, it's a part of what is described in many standards. And the reason again is because you don't do everything from scratch within one single organization. So that means that you may use acquisition to, as I mentioned, acquire components or raw material. You could have a bit more complex things. You could buy more or less off-the-shelf products or systems or subsystems. You could actually outsource production, which is another type of acquisition, where you basically have been doing most part of the development in-house, and you just purchase production based on specifications and perhaps drawings and standards that you have been producing. But you also may outsource a complete development of a system or a subsystem. This is where I will spend most of the time during this hour. And if you are working in an organization which is typically a procurement agency, this is basically the whole idea of what you're doing. You are specifying a system and contract that to somebody else to do the actual development and to produce the system. If I would try to put all these options in some sort of grid with time and effort and complexity, of course, I would start down here with components and raw material, pretty low complexity, and doesn't require a lot of time and effort for you. Production based on existing specifications is also, well, the acquisition part of this is pretty straightforward, because you have already been developing the specifications and plans and drawings, whatever is needed to just perform the production elsewhere. You may go out and buy some commercial off-the-shelf existing things to use as subsystems within your own development chain. This requires a bit more effort because you need to integrate things and so on. It's a bit more complex than just adding nuts and bolts or whatever simple component that you may require as well. Development of complete new subsystems. Again, there is a more development effort included in this, and also an integration effort to your own to the rest of the system that you're producing. So complexity rises, as does time and effort needed. You may at some point of time face this thing here, midlife update. Suppose you have a system and at some point of time you would need to update it for continue the lifetime or to improve its performance or capabilities or whatever. This is something that also could be outsourced and bought from somebody else. This is, again, a bit higher complexity, could be quite time consuming and quite big effort. But the big thing is here full-scale system development, where your own organization basically just produces the user requirements and contract somebody else to do the main development things. Okay, short look in the standards then. 15288, as I think was mentioned in the presentation by Cecilia, is a standard for system lifecycle processes. And it has actually a section which describes acquisition. But it's a pretty brief one, 2 pages, compared to the technical processes, which is the main chunk of this standard, of course. You can see it's pretty scarce with information, and it may help you to some extent in the lower end of this picture, where you do acquisition of more components and things. It does not do any good for you if you want to have interworking between the acquisition parts of the process and the actual development part of the process. The standard doesn't really give you much support there. And again, this is what I will be spending most of the time on this hour. Okay, I think I mentioned requirements are central to everything that we do, when this is the case also in acquisition, of course. And there is a definition for requirement management in ISO IEC 29148. And it mentioned that requirement management also includes associated context and historical information. And this is specifically true because there will be probably more associated context to the requirements than there would normally be if you would do everything in-house. Another thing that's mentioned in here is that you should be controlling and publishing the baseline for requirements. And publishing is essential again here, because this is what you typically would use as a contract enclosure, a contract appendix, technical specification, another specification for the system to be developed. Okay, so what does this mean from a requirements management point of view in an acquisition context? Well, to some extent, you could claim that this, well, requirements should be always managed. This is business as usual. But there is an additional complexity, since you need to transfer data and responsibility outside your own organization to the contractor part. This calls again for special attention. There are other things that you typically don't see much of when you do things in-house, but also requires support from requirements management. And examples are request for information, where you sort of do a scan of what the market is possible to provide and to deliver. Request for quotation, where you actually invite contractors or bidders, I should say, to bid for the contract to do the development together with you. You need to do evaluation of bids that you receive. You need at some point of time to do some sort of negotiations to before be able to contract things. All of these things adds more data and requires traceability to be intact, and to for you to be sure that you follow the input basic requirements, and that your process is flawless. After there has been signed the contract, as always, you need to monitor things with design reviews, with the verification and so on. And this is something that you again do in any case, but now you have this extra complexity that you need to exchange data with an external party while doing all this, also while doing the change management. Okay, so let's have a look at what data there is to manage. Well, I did mention that requirements are central, but they're not the only thing. Standard I was referring to mentioned the associated context. Typically, this could be all sorts of contextual information, document structure, which really translates a list of requirements to a requirement specification document. There may be all sorts of references, links. There may, as time progresses, review data and verification, validation data that will be generated, and that needs to be managed in context with the requirements. But also adding acquisition to this, again, more full-scale acquisition of system development. There are lots of other data that also emerges here. I think I mentioned some request for quotation, negotiations, and so on. Statement of work, which is not only technical requirements, but also requirements on how to proceed with the work during the project time and so on. You may want to keep track of deliverables of documentation or deliverables of provided items, and so linked to your requirements and so on. You will receive data in bids, which you need to evaluate according to criteria that you have been defining in advance. Negotiations will be done in parallel. I'll get back to many of these things in detail later on, and so on and so forth. You should also be aware that there is a legal aspect to this, because we have laws to comply to when it comes to procurement, and there are many parties in there that is not only look at the technical aspects of this thing. There are, as I mentioned, a number of parties in there. There may be the end user, and there may be the procurement agency, which has the task of translating the user needs and requirements from the end user to something that can be acquired and developed by the contractor. And there are no sharp lines here, but somewhere in the higher area of the left wing and the right wing, that's where you do most of the things from the procurement agency. Of course, you monitor things all the way through here. But this is typically where you spend a lot of time in the early and late phases of the development. But you should be aware that the data is generated not only when you develop requirements, which will be done by your users, by the procurement agency, and by the contractor. Not only when you do the verification and validation, which is also again some sort of joint effort with all parties cooperating here, but acquisition in itself generates lots of data. This is something that is hard sort of to put into the V model, simply because of the fact that the V model doesn't really describe how to interact with acquisition in your development. Regardless of this, all the data that is generated needs to be managed, and requirement management should start actually cover the whole system life cycle, from the early concepts to basically retirement and replacement, including, of course, the development and the acquisition phases. Okay, requirements as such, they have a number of purposes. This is sort of standard that you need requirements to understand what the stakeholder needs. You need to have requirements to say how work should be performed, what sort of methods and standards you should do and follow. You need requirements as some sort of baseline for verification and validation to prove that the system has been produced according to the specification and solves the intended use. So these are purposes that often are referred to as the main purposes for requirements. But to this, I would wish to add a fourth purpose, meaning that requirements are actually the basis for your evaluation and contract, signing of contract in an acquisition project. To do this, you need to collect requests for quotation replies. You need to evaluate bids, you need to be able to, after evaluation and negotiations, award contracts, and you need to monitor progress of the project after contract and verification. Also, project acceptance is a key thing in here. And while developing your requirement, you should start thinking of these already now, because you cannot really just write a set of requirements, send them out, and hope that you will get bids that are possible to evaluate. You need to, even in early phases, see what is needed for you to evaluate and find the best bidder. That may lead to that you may add one or two extra requests for information to be produced, or consider if your requirements will give you data that will allow evaluation and so on. Okay, so let's take a step back and look at what is your acquisition like. It can be really beautiful. It can be like a sail in the archipelago on a sunny day and everything is fine, but there could be rocks. So you could just hope for the best, or you could do something to plan your route to avoid the worst rocks in here. This is something that you of course need to do from the beginning. So What sort of rocks are there? Well, there are a few. I will mention some of them. Some things that could cause problems for you is obviously poor communication. And poor communication may have many reasons. One obvious reason is poor quality of the data that you are delivering, poor quality of your requirements. And if you have been following our webinars from Reuse, you've probably seen many cases where we focus on helping our customers to produce high quality requirements. So one thing is that this would definitely help you. It will simplify communication externally between customer and supplier. There may also be communication issues internally on each side, perhaps between technical and commercial parts of the customer and technical commercial parts of the supplier side. But also sometimes there are different teams involved in the bidding process and in actually project performance. So that means that there is some sort of handover at some point of time. So communication and good quality of data is something that would help you evade these rocks. You also need to clarify your expectations on how the bidder should respond to your request for quotation, but you also need some sort of clarification sessions, because even with the best quality and the best description of rules and stuff, you need to assure that there is a common understanding. Evaluation in itself can be pretty much of a challenge, because if you just ask, can you comply to this, and everybody say yes, of course, and you have nothing to evaluate on more than the price, basically, then you have this risk that you will get the cheapest guy who says yes, of course, to everything that you ask for. That's perhaps not the bidder that you would wish to cooperate with. I don't know. What can you do to evade this? Well, of course, you can plan your evaluation and be sure to request the needed information for the evaluation already in the request for quotation. And you should, as I mentioned, think of this already when you start writing your requirements. You should also make room for clarification sessions during the process. Another rock, of course, is any legal issues. As you understand, this is something where there are not only technical people on each side to be happy to solve any technical problem, but you need to do this in the right way. And the way to not get inside in some sort of problem here is to be transparent, have good traceability, good management of data, so you could respond to any questions on how things have been performed. Okay, let me real quick illustrate two of these strategies. The first one is hope for the best. Just go out and sail and you hope you don't hit anything. What do? Well, you write the specification, send it out. You evaluate on compliant, not compliant, basically technical and cost, nothing else. And you get to a contract, and then you start having reviews and you start to verify things. And you don't really lower your risk from misconceptions or misunderstanding much until you get to this phase after contract has been signed. Then you figure out if you did hit a rock or something, if it did become more expensive than you thought, if there has been misunderstandings and all sorts of issues beforehand. So hope for the best. Well, not the way we would recommend things, but we would argue that you should navigate between the rocks and be sure to plan your acquisition step by step. Initially, you should spend some time on your system definition, and this is basically standard systems engineering. You should have, you could call this all sorts of things. We have sometimes used the name the system, or it's a system definition document, system design document, or whatever you may call this thing here. Basically, define a system of interest really good before you start specifying requirements on it. And while specifying requirements, be sure that you add the requirements quality to reduce risk for misunderstanding, and also start defining the criteria for your evaluation already here. You should probably have a technical aspect, cost aspect, but you could have a technology readiness level to sort of assess the maturity of the offered solution. You should identify whatever rules you would wish the bidders to follow while responding to your request and so on. So if you have done this, you have a better, you have reduced the risk of misunderstandings here a bit. But also with that, you need to, it's highly recommended that you would have some sort of an opportunity for bidders and yourself to clarify any question marks there may be. Or again, to reduce risk for future problems. Having done that, the evaluation should give you a better understanding of the system, of course, but even after that, you would need to clarify the contents of the initial bid, because there may be differences in how different companies express themselves. There may be difference in how they interpret things that you have been sending out and so on. Follow-up evaluation. Having done all these things, you're in a lower risk where you sign your contract, and there is a better basis for selecting the best supplier from your point of view, and the lower risk for appeal if anybody would not be so happy with your choice of supplier, because they would probably know the reason why they would not be selected if you have been doing these clarifications and have a good communication all the time. In contract, then reviews should be pretty straightforward from a technical point of view, at least, because you have been doing a thorough work here in the evaluation part. And in verification, we also would suggest to, again, follow standard systems engineering, be active part of this, do the planning together with the supplier, make sure that you agree on how verification shall be performed before doing it. After performing the verification, then do the review of the outcome. And you would, of course, have a lower probability that you would get into problem if you would follow all of this. And finally, all of this should be maintained and managed over the life cycle. So all the specifications, all the evaluation criteria, all the rules that you apply, all the replies you get, changes that may occur over time, verification, validation data, all of this maintained and traceable will give you a good position to make a good, have a good successful project. I mentioned laws a bit. You should be aware that there are a number of laws that may or may not apply, depending on what sort of organization or company you are. There may be procurement laws saying that it would not, it will actually control to what extent you may change things and how you should do that in the process. And also the strategy, what to, how your acquisition should be performed may affect applicability of these laws. Should you do an open competition, sometimes you perhaps are forced to do this for legal reasons. Could you address a few specific suppliers? Sometimes you can, sometimes it's not allowed. Are there any security classification issues? What sort of project are you talking about? The development, middle of update, the mods and cots or whatever. So this is something that needs to be considered. And this seminar does not aim to give you a full understanding of the legal aspects, not by any means, but I would want to stress this again. We're not only on the technical area now. Technicians may be best friends, but there are legal and commercial aspects that needs to be considered as well to evade some of the lost rocks I was mentioning. Okay, evaluation. When you get this far, you have had a few bids, you have had a number of clarification sessions, and you probably have been doing a good job to prepare for evaluation already when you're writing your requirements and so on. But this is where you actually do generate a lot of data. There will be responses, there will be data added during the evaluation, and there will be, you would need containers of this information to break down requirements, design reviews, and handle verification and so on, and to have ways of assuring that the agreed data has been frozen, and this is something that is incremental over time. So you would need to manage a whole lot of data, and again, specifically to acquisition are the top few bullets here. A change will happen. So even if you have some sort of response, you may have updated response, you may need to update rules for responding, and all sorts of things. So you need to maintain history for all of this. I'm mentioning here attributes to clarify your expectations on the response. Let's dwell on that for a minute too. You're typically not just sending a list of requirements. Of course you do send requirements, but you also send some sort of contextual information. You may send some questions, and meaning that if you have a specification, including all of this, you need to classify things. You need to be clear saying this is actually a requirement, this is not, this is information, or whatever question that needs some sort of special attention during the bid phase and so on. You may prioritize your requirement, and this can be from a technical point of view, and again, it can be from a procurement law point of view, where shall and should requirements have different meaning. In some cases, for example, if there is a shall requirement and somebody fails to state compliance on that, it may be so that they will be disqualified as a bidder. So you should always be sure to well, at least if this applies, but anyway, you should be sure not to write shall if it's not necessary, because it may drive cost, it may make you lose the best bidder, and so on. But if you don't write shall on everything, which is the easy way, you need to specify the implication of whatever other levels of priority you may have for all sorts of reasons. So clarity, specify what you mean with everything. And having said that, shall requirements are not always a good thing. Sometimes you definitely need them. And here's one example where you definitely, well, probably one single shall requirement could have saved somebody a lot of money. There was a procurement where a number of trains were found to be too big to fit in the tunnel. So at some point of time, if somebody had written, the trains shall fit in the tunnel, would have been a great idea. And you can negotiate with many things, performance and lost decimal on, well, whatever the capability you may have or not. But some things you don't negotiate with. You don't negotiate with solid rock in a tunnel. So this is typically where you need to have a shall requirement. You may specify your expectations when it comes to verification. This is also something that may be cost driving. You may, the more information you can provide, the better you can clarify your expectations. There may be other things that you request explicitly for some additional information. I think I did mention technology readiness level. This is something that could be read a bit more about there in the links. I think these links will be available in the presentations that we will publish later on. In short, this is something that's developed by NASA and the Department of Defense in the US, and many other agencies use this. This is a way to assess technology readiness, basically, for offered solutions. It's a great thing to evaluate risk. Yeah, okay. So these are examples of things that you may want to specify, not only with the requirement as such, but how should they be interpreted and what should the bidder typically do when they get your request. On the other hand, you also should specify what you expect from the bidders. They should probably state compliance to requirements. They should probably state comment specifically if they don't have any If they cannot state compliant, why is that, and what could they possibly comply to? Respond basically to everything else that you have been requesting in terms of attributes, depending on what tools you have and so on and so forth. But the more you can specify your expectations, the better you could help the bidders to assess if they're complete, and the better you could reduce risk for non-comparable replies, because some bidder may want to present their product in one way and some in somebody else, so you would have problems comparing them. And rules, of course, clarify these rules. If compliant, no ifs and buts. We will stop reading if you said compliant, and we will assume that you will be fully compliant without any restrictions and so on and so forth. So by having a well worked through data package when you send it out and you get the bidders to respond according to rules you have defined, you will have bids that will probably be issued to compare and evaluate if you get back into the same tool or database, whatever you're using. You should in advance also have again, I should mention this because why are we talking about this? Well, we're managing a lot of data, and this is typically data that is generated in acquisition and needs to be managed in some way or another. Of course, you need to do the evaluation as has been probably planned in advance. It should have been that. You should know what to evaluate on, and you should be again sure to get the data that you need from the bidders. You may have these clarification meetings in perhaps a number of occasions. You may need, as a result of this, have updates in the bid. And this again needs for traceability of change, whatever has changed from first bid to last and best and final offer, or whatever you get towards the end. Okay, evaluation then. Well, if you just ask for compliance and everything is shall, so if you say everybody say yes to everything, they're in. If they say no, they're out, again, depending on applicable law. This is not much of an evaluation, but this is sort of a first qualification. But then you should get into details. So if suppose you have a number of requirements, a few examples here. Here's the should requirement, specifying some sort of speed for whatever system we're buying. If you ask for this, you get compliant, and you get compliant, and you'll have price tags. So again, you will have no way to make a good comparison other than by price here. You could optionally ask for more additional data, and this is something that you could do in the request for quotation. If you ask for data, you will get data from both or all bidders, and you will be able to use this in the evaluation. So perhaps you would ask for, in this case, actual performance. It would give you some more understanding. It could help you perhaps to some extent in the evaluation. Now, it still looks like this guy, they're both compliant, but they're cheaper and they actually have higher performance, higher than you have required, but who knows, it may mean some sort of advantage to you. Another example now, you may have a shall requirement here. And if you just say it shall do this, that, again, you will have compliance and you still have these price tags. Somebody may argue, well, if it's a shall requirement, it's yes or no, and it's not much you could evaluate. But I say there is. Again, ask for more data. In this case, perhaps you would ask for technology readiness. How mature is your product, bidder A and bidder B? How mature is it? What risk will I run if I would contract any of you to do this? And this is where you often have very interesting information. This guy says, okay, we can do this. We've done so. We have a TRL level 9, which is the highest level, means basically it has been proven in actual scenarios, and it has been documented. So we know this works. The other guys say still compliant, meaning that they would undertake, that they would guarantee that they will do it when they deliver, which may be years ahead in time. But they have not really a working solution right now. It's still valid for them to say compliant. But if they say, okay, we just initiated the study, but we promised to make it, okay, doesn't look quite as interesting now, does it, with a cheaper price? And if you do this for many, or for a selected key requirements at least, you may find something that, okay, the bit more expensive bidder, they have a basically existing system, a few things under development and not much that is in early maturity levels within their own development. Whereas this bidder, more than half, 60, 70%, whatever, is something that they don't really have today, but they promise. Okay, so if you're prepared to trade low price for high risk, you should go with this one, but now you have a better basis for making your selection here. Okay, before signing contract, there are a few more things that you need to do, and often there is a short list, and you need to do the final selection after some sort of negotiations. There may be parallel negotiations. This is tricky because then you may have different versions of your own requirements depending on who you're talking to. A few examples, say bidder one says, okay, we have this requirement, it should 100%, and they say not compliant. However, we can manage only 90%. Okay, perhaps that's enough for you. So if you would sign a contract with these guys, this is what the requirement should be. It should be what they guarantee they will do. You should change should to shall, because now it's not for evaluation, now it's for contract, and they should be compliant. This one's, okay, it should 100% compliant, no ifs and no buts, but you still need to change this to shall. Never ever sign a contract where it says should. What does it mean that it should do something when it's contracted? This is for evaluation again, and whenever you contract something, they should stick to what they have been promising. And again, this third option could typically be that not compliant and nothing that they have in the roadmap, nothing that is planned to be supported at all. So it's a should requirement. If you can live without it, simply delete it. So this means that this also adds data that should be managed. You have different versions of things depending on who you're talking to, and you have the input from the bidders that would sort of guide you towards what would be the end version of the contract. As I mentioned, should is useful for quotation and evaluation, but not in contracts. It should have been ruled out before that. Now, signing contract. Well, this is many times companies and organizations are pretty traditional. They print paper and they have a physical signature on a piece of paper. This means that contracts are made of paper, and this signed piece of paper rules. This is what is applicable regardless of what you may or may not have in your database. So this means that you should be sure that you generate these documents from the database where you've had all the data all along. So publish documents for contract. Now there's a word of warning. Which is the quickest way to make a database invalid? Well, I think there are a few ways, but this is a pretty quick one. If you produce from your requirements database a requirement specification in an editable format, and somebody edits this outside the database and signs it, okay, what do we have? We have a signed version of something that is not equal to what you have in your database. So now what's the status of the data in the database? This could be tricky to get back to and figure out, okay, now what should we continue to do the work on? A piece of paper doesn't really help you if you want to continue your development process. But there are ways to get around this, and I will show you a demonstration in a few minutes how you could actually, with the tools that we will provide, use actually this thing as an opportunity rather than a problem. We could do this. We could have we could allow people to update it and sign it and bring it back to the database. I will show you that in minutes. So why do we need to do this? Well, we need to follow up things after contract. So life does not end when contract is signed. Follow up means that now we're here. but we have all this left. We need to review things, we need to verify, and we need to validate. And this should be based on a valid set of requirements. So there's a life after contract as well. And after having signed contract, well, now we're basically on track again within our development V. However, with an external party. So we would need to go back to all the design reviews, all the verification and things with the external parties, meaning that we would have a way to exchange data and to keep data valid over time, over the life cycle. Okay, finally, a short demonstration. I was mentioning this scenario. Suppose we have developed a specification, technical specification, and we have this connected to our database. In this case, we'll of course use our own tool, System Engineering Studio. We have connection to this here, and we have not only the Word document as such, but lots of other contextual data, attributes, links, history. We have been checking quality and all sorts of things. So this is not a simple Word document, but the format is a Word. And since it's a Word document, we can mail it. So let's mail this over to this office building somewhere else where people are negotiating. So they take this document, print it, edit something in it, and sign it. Okay, send it back. Now we have something that's connected to the database, but we have something else, another version of this signed. So what we need to do is to replace, detach this, attach this, and be able to continue our work after a contract with a valid set of data. Okay, short demonstration. These are basically the steps that I already mentioned. So let's just have a look in the demonstration. Now I have this Word file, which is actually developed using System Engineering Studio, and there is now this add-on inside Word where you can connect to the server with all its capabilities of quality control, of history, of traceability, and managing verification, validation data, and what have you, still in Word document. So if we open this and connect to our database, we see that every work item identified here has its identifier, and there are, even though it's not visible in this screen, there are attributes, there are all sorts of things. Now let's have a look at history for this one. We could see that in the entire Word document, there are a few baselines. There has been work ongoing on this. So let's compare current version to the first baseline that we produced some time ago. And we can see some data has been updated, some has been added, some has been deleted. And we could select any of these and go in and check in detail what actually has been changed and so on. And also with all attributes available, even though it's not shown in this specific presentation. Okay, so now this is about to be signed for a contract, but now we have just a few more things to do before that. We need to add one requirement. Let's do that. Let's add. Now we just select add work product, and by doing so, the system produces an identifier and includes it in the database and makes it traceable and possible to assign attributes to, and so on. So this is now a new requirement, and it has, as I said, the history starts from now with its identifier and so on. I'll change a few things in another requirement. This is now a changed requirement, and the database will recognize this as there has been an update in this. And just for the sake of it, let's say, okay, we don't like this requirement very much. Let's just delete it. Okay, so we have made a few changes now. Now we should now be able to send this out, but now first of all we should save the changes, and the same changes now should be saved in the document, but also in the database to make them all sort of be aligned. Okay, so now we could continue. Well, actually, as I mentioned, all these requirements, even though they're written in Word, they have been, we've had the opportunity to analyze the contents of them and to do the traceability and so on. And there are a number of other webinars where we would go into detail about requirements quality, traceability, and all other things. I will not spend any time on that right now. But now we have saved the updates we just did in the database and in the document. And now let's, before sending things out now, create a new baseline so we can always know what was the status when we sent this out for signing of a contract. We could call this baseline ready for contract or whatever, and we will just create this baseline. So we will have sort of a snapshot of history we can always refer back to, and we can see what has been happening before and after this. Now, if the other party would have a System Engineering Studio as well, we could do some preparation for sharing so they could include it in their own environment. This is basically not necessary when you're just sending out the document as a Word file, but let's do it anyway. It doesn't cost any much. Save again. No, there probably shouldn't be any more things. No changes pending. Okay, but now this is an updated document and it's a new baseline. So let's close it down. Here's your document. Okay, so let's send this to the contract manager sitting somewhere else and ask the contract manager to please print it and sign it for the contract. We should be all set. Send it off. Okay, they're working fast on the other side. Here's the reply. And contract manager says, okay, we printed and signed. By the way, we made a few updates first. Okay, so now at this time, this is not equal to what we have in the database. We should replace this one, and the reason why I don't just overwrite it, you never know what could have there has been out there. It could have been corrupt or whatever. So for security reasons, I would just save a copy of this, but I would replace it. This now is the one that should be used. So I open this one up and enable editing of it, and now connect it again to the SES System Engineering Studio. And by doing so, it now updates the database with the changes that has been made in the document while it was away from our environment. And there's an update spotted. Let's see what this update is. We could view the changes, and we could compare it to currently the database and what we have now. And we could highlight changes to issue find. Okay, there's been a change of a number here from 5 years to 10 years, or for some reason. Now, this is actually the contracted version. So this is, well, first of all, let's save it to the database to have the database to be up to date, reflecting the contents of the document that is actually now printed and signed. Now, when that has happened, we should make sure that we could again trace back to this event in time in future for future reference. So let's make a new baseline. Create a new baseline now, and it was ready for contract before, but now it is actually signed contracted version of this specification. And now it's in the database, it's valid, and it can be used as a basis for a continued work in design reviews and verification and validation and so forth and so on. So this is sort of concluding this small presentation. We now still have what's typically is a Word document and can be used as such. And that's it. So now that's what I have been prepared for this demonstration. And now, Cecilia, could we see if there are any questions?
Yes, thank you very much, Lars. Lars will answer your questions in a minute. So if you want to ask him anything, please use the questions section. While you are writing, I will talk about our upcoming webinar, Carrying Your Requirements Everywhere. This is a new chapter in our series of webinars called Boosting MS Word with Requirements Management Capabilities. Once you have your requirements in Microsoft Word, we will show you how you can append, copy, or merge those requirements onto another source, like requirements management systems, modeling tools, etc. This is a short webinar, about half an hour, and the dates are the 9th and 11th of May. You can find more information about this series of webinars and register by following the link. So let's see if we have any questions. Can you give an example to clarify how you use question in a request for quotation?
Okay, good question. Yes, let me see. I think I was mentioning this somewhere here. Yeah, saying that you send the requirements, but you may also add a question or two. And this could be used for many reasons. One could be that you're perhaps not sure of what the bidder will be able to perform. We actually had a recent example with a customer that I was working with earlier this week. They're working on their request for quotation, and they have a few requirements saying that this and this and this should happen in real time. Okay, so now what's real time? They could do one or two things. They could specify by real time, this is what we mean. But then that may be a bit of a problem for some bidders. So they choose actually to not specify what they mean with real time, but instead they created a question, say, please bidder, please clarify, please define to us what is your understanding of real time, rather than sort of pushing the bidder to follow exactly what your needs are. We would probably make it easier and cheaper for everybody if we would not over-specify things. Another reason for a question is that you would need some more data to evaluate. Well, of course, this real-time thing is something that gives you data to evaluate. Another thing is that in some cases there may be some sort of data classification. So rather than saying that the requirement for example, protection or security or whatever that may be a bit sensitive is a bit of a problem to send out to all sorts of bidders. However, when the bidders reply, they send it from their own, their company to you. They know who the receiver will be. So you could, rather than saying the protection shall be this and that, you could ask, please clarify what sort of protection you have to your system. And then this could later on in the evaluation be evaluated and in the negotiation be translated into a requirement. So there are a few ways to use this, and I think it could be really good if you use it the right way. Hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you. Let's take another one. Why do you need to manage the requirements in a use phase after everything is verified?
Okay, let's see if I can find a way to illustrate that. Perhaps this V model would do it. Well, if you have requirements in here, and now you could argue that, okay, they have been validated, it's all fine, but you still use the system and there may be changes, there may be upgrades. And if you do changes and upgrades without taking into account that you may have these system requirements, you may actually have these user needs, you may have been doing this verification, you would do two things. You would create an actual physical system that is not equal to what has been specified in requirements, and you don't really know if you're still fulfilling the basic intention, or you don't really know if you need to make some sort of additional verification to validate that and verify and validate that the changes still the system still has its intended capabilities. So the requirement should live with the system all the way to retirement. There may also be so that you would start right here to do some sort of midlife update. And then you should have the set of requirements and verification data that is up to date, that hasn't been deviating from between the system and the documentation. So these are reasons why, as a requirement manager, this is where you relax when the system is retired. Perhaps not even that, because it may be a product family, so there may be other versions coming up and so on. But you should definitely not drop your pen when contract is signed. This is where there is a lot to do, or when even when the system has been accepted. So hope that answers that question.
Okay, thank you, Lars. So let's finish here. Thank you everybody for attending. If you have questions later or want more information, don't hesitate to contact us by email to contact@reusecompany.com or through our website, reusecompany.com, or directly to Lars if you want. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye for now.